Now that we have the layout, the header and the nav the way we want it for the tablet size, we can move to do the rest of the layout. And the rest of the layout comes in the main and the aside sections. And here's where we have a row and column. Remember in the desktop that we had one row with main being 9 columns wide and the aside being 3 columns wide. Now we want main to be 12 columns wide, and we want 2 parts in the aside, each to be 6 columns wide. To do this, we are actually going to need a second set of column values. So remember the column values that we have down here, this grid system in our desktop settings. So our desktop style down here includes this. Well, we need to have another set of them up here in our tablet layout. And the thing that we're going to change, we want the percentages to be the same because when you're choosing something that's 4 columns wide, you always want it to be 33% wide. When you're choosing something that's 9 columns, you always want it to be 75%. So those percentages are not going to change, but we need to give new column values, these new class values, so that we can identify them in the HTML. So I'm simply going to change this by adding a hyphen median here. So just hyphen median on all, hyphen M to stand for hyphen median on all of these. And there I've renamed them all. Now there are 2 important things about this. One, that the class names are different than these ones, so we can use them at different times. And the second one is that it begins with that same COL hyphen. And that way it will be able to respond to these attribute selectors that use COL columns. So those are 2 important things, different names and still have start with COL hyphen. Now we're set up to go make changes in the HTML. So here what we want to do is go up to where that first column is. So we find the very top of where the row starts. And here it is. So there's the row, and then we have the main taking up 9 columns. Notice that it also has a different value. Now this may be the first time that you've seen this, but we can set class equal to a single value, column hyphen 9, or we can set it to 2 values simply by putting a space between them. So this particular main class has column 9 and a distraction value. So 2 different values for class. This allows it to respond to 2 different style rules. It's responding to the column 9 that's right here that sets the width to 75%. And it's also responding to the distractions class. And that's up here where we're setting the main style. We're setting main not on every page, but only the mains that have class set to distraction, where we want to set these section styles. So that's how we can do that. That's how we can have 2 different classes on the same value. Now we want a third one that says, oh, I want this to respond to that column. Remember, we want this to be 12 columns wide when it's on tablet. So we're going to use that column hyphen M hyphen 12 to set this main to 12 columns when it's on that tablet size. And that way we can specify it's this class, and that will respond when it gets to the desktop layout, and it's this class, and that will respond when it's in the tablet layout. Now we want to go down into the aside, and the aside will be quite a bit different. So in the aside, we want to actually make the entire aside 12 columns wide when it's on tablet. And inside this, we're going to put a row. So I'm going to create another div and say class equals, and this is going to be a row. And that row is going to take up the entire aside. So right down here, it's on the very inside, I'm going to close that div. And then I'm going to create 2 other divs inside this row. And the first one is going to be 6 columns wide. So it's going to be column hyphen medium hyphen 6. And it's going to be the 1, 2, 3 sections. And then I'm going to close that column. And then create another column. That's div. And this one is also going to be column hyphen M6. So it's going to be 6 columns wide. And it's going to be 1, 2, 3 sections long. And then it's going to end. All right, let's see how that turned out. So now our distractions is 12 columns wide. And we go down here, there's our aside that is 12 columns wide. And this part of it is 6 columns wide. And this side is 6 columns wide. So we end up filling that whole 12 column aside into 2 different parts. And then our footer is laid out just the same, not in a row because it covers 100%. And there we've got our tablet layout. And now we can see how we transition from one to the other. We go up to the desktop. So as soon as we hit that minimum width of 992, it goes into the lighter styles. Now look what's happening here. We need to go see why this remains. So this is a setting that was set in this style for those to be that wide. And now we have to see how much do we want them to be when it's a desktop layout. How wide do we want them to be in that row? So if we go to the distraction and we say, well, when they're desktop wide, I want them to be column 12 because I want them to cover that whole span. Remember, they're inside this internal row, so it'll just fill up inside that aside. They'll take up all 12 columns of that aside. And there, we got that back in order. So now they're taking up the whole 12 columns of that inner row. So now what we have is we have an outer row that takes in all of main and all of aside. And then inside aside we have a row. And here these are 12 columns wide of that internal row. So it's a nested row inside a row. And now as we downsize and see as we transition to and we reach that min width of 992, those last styles no longer apply, but we're still above the min width of 768, so those middle styles apply. And we go down and we see all of that layout. And then we downsize one more time. When we get smaller than that min width of 768 pixels, we drop into those main styles that identify what our phone layout looks like. And there we've created a responsive web design.